Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry for the inconvenience.
That's all right.
I am Rebecca. This is Doa and Burak, whose camera doesn't work, but he is here. And
Okay.
this is our team.
Hello.
Hello.
And we are working on a project about the Marshall Islands, and we wanted to get some more insights. So thank you very much for taking time out of your day to meet with us and to speak with us. And as I already mentioned, this is part of a university project. And before we get started, are you all right with this interview being recorded?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And also, if you choose to remain anonymous in any moment, you can let us know if anything you want that you say to not be registered. Just let us know.
You can use everything I say without question.
Perfect. Okay, now to start off, just give us a brief introduction about yourself and your current role in the Marshall Islands and the activities you partake in.
Well, it's 45 years, so it's a lot of stuff, but I'll be very quick. I came here as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1981. I lived for 2 years on an outer island and actually asked for an extension of 1 year, very remote, no airport or anything, a boat every 5 months, so I had to learn the language. And as I was about to leave the Marshall Islands, a group of Bikinians heard me speaking Marshallese in a restaurant. And they said, wow, we really need somebody like you. We have all these issues with the United States. Could you help us? And I thought, okay, maybe 1 more year on an outer island in the Marshalls, which are very remote. It's Kili Island, where the Bikinians even live to this day, a lot of them. And I thought 1 more year, and that turned into 3 more years on the outer islands. So I spent 6 years on the outer islands of the Marshalls, learned the language and the culture really well. And then the person who had my job before me, who worked with the Bikinians Trust Funds, passed away, and they threw me into that position in late 1986, and I did that for 30 years. And then I decided I'd had enough. The previous mayor that was at Bikini he was corrupt. When I left, there was $130 million in trust funds. Within 8 years, there's only $30 million. I mean, they really just depleted the trust fund. So I moved on, I quit and resigned and I became the first Secretary General of the Marshall Islands Red Cross. They hadn't been recognized by the IFRC. So I got that done, and then that led me into being Secretary of Health for 4 years during the entire pandemic. And I'm proud to say that we probably had the best response in the entire world. We were the next to the last country to get it. We had a 0.1% fatality rate. We only had 3 people die in our hospitals. We had over a 90% vaccination rate, so I'm very proud of that. And then because that was a pretty rough time to be a Secretary of Health, I made a lot of enemies. It was life or death, and I was fighting with a lot of politicians we were the very first country in the world to close our borders. And then everybody was calling me crazy and everything else, but then throughout the Pacific, every other Pacific Island country did the same thing. So we were credited with saving thousands of lives because almost all the Pacific countries closed their borders at one point. So I'm very proud of that, but I made a lot of enemies during that time. I got into a lot of arguments with politicians, so as soon as my 4-year contract was up, they decided they weren't going to rehire me, and then 186 doctors and nurses signed a petition to keep me on. They gave me a 2-year contract, and then I got involved with trying to figure out the mismanagement of the Bikini and Trust Fund. Since my wife's a Bikinian, I wanted to know where the money went, and I helped them get that money. And it turns out that there was a lot of squandering and corruption involved, and the RMI government, the Marshall Islands government, didn't like the fact that I was involved in that, so they decided to pull back on that extension of the contract. So now here I am, I'm working for the people of Bikini. I'm in their office right now. I'm a consultant, that's my role. I'm also the project manager for something called the Pacific Media Institute. We train young journalists in Micronesia on how to be journalists. It's a really cool organization. And I'm also a member of what's called ASTO, the Association of States and Territories Health Officials, as an alumni. And I'm on their preparedness committee. This is for a U.S. government thing, which is unraveling very quickly, as you all know probably. But that's me. I mean, it's a lot of stuff over 45 years. I skipped a lot of things, but that's it.
Okay. And in which atoll do you currently live on, and what outer atoll were you first living on?
Okay, so right now I'm on Madro Atoll, which is the capital city. There's about less than 40,000 people in the Marshall Islands right now. Madro has about 20 of those thousand, about half the population. And I lived on Namu Atoll for 3 years, and I lived on Kili Island for 3 years. But I've been here for the rest of that time. I have my wife's a Bikini, and we have 5 kids and 8 grandkids, most of which live with me. Can't tell you what that's
Okay.
like.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And now, could you describe kind of the connection that you have with the atolls and the land and the lagoon, and how those enter into your daily life?
Well, you have to understand the Marshall Islands, the highest point is a bridge that goes over a pass. I mean, it's like 30 feet. The rest of the islands, everywhere in the Marshall Islands, you're at a high tide, you're about 2 feet above sea level, and it's flat as a pancake. So you can imagine how scary that can be. Like just on Saturday, we had the wind blow up, and we had a very high tide, and remember it was a full moon, and the roads were inundated with rocks and waves, and you just have a hard time getting home. You know, I live way out. I live about 20 some miles out from where I am right now, and it's a long drive, but you know, the road sometimes is so thin. There's ocean on both sides. So when the waves kick up, it's very hard to drive. But you know, your relationship with the land and the elements is extreme here. You feel everything. A windy day, you get kind of nervous because things start falling out of trees. Trees fall over sometimes. I've been through a really bad typhoon here when early on in my Peace Corps days. There was a drought for a couple years during that time. So when you get an extreme weather condition here, you really feel it, and it can be quite scary.
Okay. And would you say that this relationship with the land and the sea really plays a role in the culture and the identity of the Marshallese?
Oh yeah, I mean it's you know, most of my education, the most valuable part of my education was growing up with these old Bikinian men. I was probably your age, I'm early 20s when I started working with the Bikinians, and I was translating for them in front of the United Nations, in front of Congress, virtually every media organization out there. I at one point or another translated for them. And I can say without question that these old men, they really understood everything about their environment. Not so much these days, the kids with the internet and all that kind of stuff. It's not the same. These old men, there was no TV, no internet, and sometimes there was radio, sometimes it didn't work. But these old men were so connected to the environment, and those were my teachers. Those were the people that I traveled with and lived in hotel rooms with and translated their story, the Bikinian story, to the world. So I learned a lot from those old men, and the one thing that they were really good at is and they taught me a lot of this. I can do it myself to this day. They taught me about the weather and how to learn about the sky. I tried to learn about how to read the waves. I could never do it. It was too complicated. They have a very complicated way of reading the waves. But they did teach me about weather and how to predict things, and I can always tell when the rain's coming or, you know, what we should be prepared for. But they're very, very connected. The older people especially are very connected to the environment here.
Okay, and that leads perfectly into the next question of like, what differences do you notice between the younger and older generations relating to the land?
Rebecca, I was wondering, since you mentioned that you all already live in other atolls, is there any obvious cultural differences between these islands and how the interaction between different islands?
Okay, so Mandurah, that's a good question. And I'll get back to your other question in a second, Rebecca. So Madro is like a small town anywhere in Italy or the U.S. or whatever. It's got 20,000 people. You got cars, electricity, internet. I got Starlink at my house. It's just like a little. You got grocery stores, and you got the governments here, government buildings. You got 24/7. Well, you're supposed to have 24/7 electricity. It doesn't always work out like that. We have a lot of power outages. But you go to an outer island, and it's like, you're living in a little shack. Your shower every day is a bucket of water over your head. Everybody runs out of cigarettes within the first month or so if there's no airport out there. I mean, it's like it's living in nature, and most of them. I came out with a group of 12 volunteers. By the end of my second year, a lot of them had quit. I mean, it's hard living on an outer island, and most people don't like it. I grew to absolutely love it. I have a business degree, and I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? Go back to the States and work in a bank or something? So I thought, I love living on these outer islands. I'm young. I'm never going to get this chance again. So I kept extending my stay on the outer islands because I just loved it. It was a great thing to experience. I was always a big backpacker when I was young, and spent a lot of time in the woods and hiking and stuff. So this to me was like heaven, and I really enjoyed the outer islands. So it's very different than the atmosphere here, where I've got I watch the news every night on YouTube and all that kind of crap. But very different. The two different environments completely. And you're only living out there. You're living with 200 people on an island. Everybody knows every little mole on your face, and these people are extremely good psychologists. Like a reason a lot of people don't survive very well on the outer islands is within no time at all, even the kids, they figure out who you are and they hand you your personality on a plate. And if you don't like who you are, you leave. You think you're going to this outer island, it's a different language, no one's going to know who you are. Well, they figure you out so quickly. And a lot of people can't handle that, and it's very hard for them sometimes to deal with that kind of stress. And you're never alone. I mean, it's only 200 people, but I had guitars in my house, and there were all these people in my house playing guitars with me and sleeping overnight. And they don't like it when you're alone. They think it's a really bad thing to be alone, especially on an outer island. So I always have people hanging out with me, and that's also, if you're an American and used to your space and everything, very hard to get used to. So big difference between these two kind of environments. I forgot, what was your question, Rebecca? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Doa.
Duh. Okay.
Sorry, and next question. How do you commute between the islands since they are quite far each other?
Okay, most of the atolls now have airports. For example, the place where I lived for 3 years with no airport now they have 2 airports on their atoll. So it's a plane ride back and forth, usually an hour or so. Bikini's like 2.5 hours away. There's ships that go out there on occasion. So that's how you get back and forth. Ships and planes. Okay.
Question was the differences between the younger and older generations that you have noticed.
Yeah, so part of my experience that I didn't talk about before was I was president of the very best private school for about 12 years. I was on the board for 20, but president for 12, and we created a high school. And I also a board of regents on the College of Marshall Islands. I was on that for 8 years. So I've had and I was a teacher for 6 years. So I had a lot of, and I'm a filmmaker, and I've made all my films. I've made 6 feature films in Marshallese. They always have a child as the central character. I think for me, it happened one day when my son, my youngest son, we were in a video store, and he just said to me, "Hey, Dad, how come there's no films in Marshallese?" And I thought, that's a really awful thing. Think about that, growing up all your life, never seeing a film in your own language, set in your own country, dealing with things that are unique to your own culture. So I said to my youngest son, who was 10 at the time, Max, I said, I'm going to make a film. And he said, "But Dad, you don't even have a camera." I knew nothing about it. And I just taught myself how to do this. I got really good camera equipment. And by my third or fourth film, they were all over the world. They were playing in New York and LA, and opening for film festivals, and one opened for a film festival in Australia. So to me, to bring these younger Marshallese into this modern world now, and they're into it. I mean, they're on TikTok and YouTube, and they do wonderful things. I find them very entertaining, but they're very, very different than the older people. As I mentioned before, my education was so. I'm so thankful and so grateful for these old people who are very patient with me. I was like nuts with the questions, I just never ending, and I used to drive them crazy, but they loved the idea of sitting down. Here's somebody young who actually wants to know what their lives are like. A lot of the younger Marshallese don't do that. And I find that very sad, that they have the grandparents living in their houses, and they just, that they're treated really well. Marshallese love their elders, but you have to get the stories out of them, because when the thing I learned, I wrote a book called For the Good of Mankind, where it's all oral. It's an oral, tradition of their histories and everything. These Bikinians told me these stories, and I was always recording them because I'd always around the media, they always wanted to know the story. And so storytelling became a very important part of my life. And these old people, I realized it one day when I was living on Kili on the outer island, and this old man, he used to tell me stories every night. He lived right beside me, and I just sit there and listen. I mean, I'm a good listener. And that's one of the trademarks of a good storyteller, is that they can listen. And I listened to this old man every night, and his name was Reuben Judah. And then all of a sudden he died. And it was like all his stories went into the grave with him. And I had recorded some of his stories, but I just thought to myself, I've got to start getting these stories recorded. I've got to start writing these down, because these stories are going to disappear. These were firsthand, when the Bikinians got moved in 1946, I was translating for people who were in the inner circle of that decision-making time, when they're being told they're going to detonate these massive weapons on their atoll, and they're going to have to move for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. Imagine that, and you don't even have a high school education, and you're trying to take all that in. And I got to translate as a very young person for these remarkable, astounding old Bikinian men. And so to me, that education was very valuable. And I look at the younger people today, and I just wish, I encourage them, even my kids, I'm talking stories with them all the time, my grandkids, because I'm trying to do that, instill in them that the idea that these old people are extremely valuable, and they've got all these stories of the way things were. It's very different in this culture, even in the US, because the difference between 40 years ago and now is astounding. I mean, it's astounding for everybody all over the world, but especially for the Marshall Islands, where I grew up with TV. Kids here didn't grow up with TV, So there were a lot of differences, remarkable difference between young and old people here today. And I don't know, I kind of got long-winded on that answer, but it's a really good question, because the young people of today, I think, are really missing out. If I had one wish for them, it's like, talk to your grandparents. Learn what they saw and experienced, because I don't think they do it enough.
Okay, yeah, well, this also kind of leads on to the next question, part of it. This is more to regards to the atomic bomb testing that we have been mentioning, and you've mentioned a few times. Is there any noticeable impacts that are still in the community? And also, I don't know, since you've been involved in education, how do the younger generations learn about this? Is it through storytelling, or is it through school? And how does that work?
Well, that's another, you guys are asking really good questions. There's been a huge impact here. I mean, you can see when you go to Bikini, you can see the physical things that happen to the atoll. You can see Bravo Crater. It's a mile wide and 200 feet deep. I was just up there in July again. I've been there many, many times. I was actually diving in that crater. I'm a diver. And you can see the cement bunkers from the testing period. It was almost 80 years ago. So you've got all these really interesting things to see physically. on Bikini especially. And in Waytalk, you have the Runit Dome, which is like, it has radioactive material in there it's going to be radioactive for tens of thousands of years. And I've been up there several times. I mean, I walked across in flip-flops and all my kids turned out normal and everything. But, it's really, you can see physical things. But journalists always came out here, and like I said, I've translated for virtually every news organization on the planet, I think, at one time or another. And they're always coming out looking for physical deformities and things that they, in their own minds, think may have happened from radiation. And to me, it's not so much that. It's what's happened to people psychologically. It's created what I call a victim mentality. I don't know if you understand that, but it's sort of like, okay, the United States, they destroyed my islands, they destroyed my atoll, they altered my life, my family's life for generations. Now they have to take care of me and do everything for me. And it's not everybody. I mean, there's some really remarkable people involved in these 4 atolls, but there's a lot of people who feel, and I understand this feeling, but I think it's terribly destructive on a human being. And that is, it's this feeling like, not only should they be buying my house and taking care of me, they should be brushing my teeth too. I mean, they should be doing everything for me because of what they did. And I understand that. But what that does to a human psyche and to your motivation, even as a young kid, it's just like, I shouldn't have to do anything. I should just be taken care of. And again, this isn't everybody, but I've seen it in a lot of people here, and it's very sad. And so these journalists come out looking for all these physical things to see, and I try to explain to them what it's done to people mentally. This idea that there was so much destruction done to their land and their atolls that they can't even, they're not motivated to get educated sometimes, and they're not motivated to do things and to grow as human beings. And I find that to me is one of the most destructive things that's happened from the nuclear testing. Now these days, a lot of the young people, and I've met, there's so many extraordinary young people here in their 20s and 30s who have been educated about the nuclear testing. And they're doing their best. There's the Human Rights Council president was just out here. I can't remember his name. Actually, is he from Italy? I don't remember. But the Human Rights President of the United Nations was here just about 2 weeks ago. And they're trying to, the younger people are trying to resolve this through the United Nations, and a lot of these young people are really well educated. I mean, I listen to them talk sometimes, and a lot of them are more westernized than me at this point. They're just like above me in their intelligence and the way they conduct themselves. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future. But the one thing they don't have when they tell the stories, they may have heard things from their grandparents or may not have, but the one thing I noticed the difference is, like when I was translating for people with firsthand, everybody come around, here's the Commodore Wyatt, everybody's got to leave. These are men that were sitting there, and these were the men and women who suffered for decades at the hands of the United States. Starvation, neglect, callous neglect, all this arrogance and ignorance on the part of the United States, just saying, there's only, if you watch some of these films, and there's a lot of films out there that have been done on this Radio Bikini Forbidden Paradise. I made a film called The Sound of Crickets at Night. All these films that are out there really detail well what happens, so they can watch and they can listen to some of their elders tell some of these stories, but they don't have the same connection to the land. That's one thing that's really important about the Marshall Islands that you should know about, is this isn't like the westernized version of land. Like all my kids, and it's a matrilineal society, so women are very powerful here. We have a woman president. Oftentimes people say to me, oh yeah, you live in this uncivilized country. And I say, no. These are friends of mine from high school or whatever. And I said, no. We have a woman president, guns are illegal, we have universal health care and universal basic income. We're the civilized people here. And when you look at the United States and what they've done here over these years, and they treat us like, even now to this day, I can't stand the way the United States treats us sometimes. It's almost like we're these uncivilized people, and it really bothers me because I don't believe that. I believe we're more civilized than most of the countries in the world. And I don't know how I got off on this, but the idea that some of these young people have been able to transform themselves into advocates. It's one thing if you experienced it firsthand and you went through all the starvation and all the issues the Bikinians have had and these other nuclear victims in the Marshall Islands have had over these decades. It's one thing if you experience firsthand. So when you talk about it, even when I talk about it, I almost feel like I have experienced firsthand. Because I translated this story for 30 years from these old men. But these young people have to actually create the caring in their mind from hearing stories secondhand from people who may have survived it, or even now it's been 80 years. Even the people who are alive today who may have been around in 1946, 80 is a very old age for Marshallese. I mean, I'm 67, and most of my friends who were my age, like when I grew up on Namu, they're gone. Diabetes, we have one of the highest per capita diabetes rates in the world. A lot of malnutrition here. People die early. They die in their 50s, 40s, 50s, early 60s. So it's very unusual to have someone 80 years old and even be able to be a storyteller. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on all that. I start talking, and it's something I'm very passionate about, if you haven't realized that yet.
Yeah, it's okay. It's good to hear the information still. Well, also moving on more to the territory and the changes you have noticed throughout the years and the past 10, 20 years, or even further from that, since you've been there so long. Have there been any changes? So it could include erosion, coastal erosion, or the housing, the informal housing, floods, and all of that.
There's, and this is interesting too, and it's one thing I'm very passionate about, because again, when people talk about climate change, they think about rising sea levels, and we have that. It's just Saturday. It's Wednesday here. Saturday we had issues driving to my house. It happens all the time here. We get these high. If the sea level comes up these days. If there's a wind, a full moon, and a high tide, man, it's tough. It's tough driving here. So you have that issue, and it's in 2011 and 2015 on Kili, the sea level rose to the point where almost the whole islands were covered. And I remember someone sent me a video from Kili. This is where the Bikinians live, and I was really astounded. And it was this video of this kid. He's walking along, he's about 10 years old, he's about knee deep in water, and he's walking along and he's got a bag of rice on his shoulder, which to anyone looking at that, they're going, oh my God, this kid's walking from one house to another with this bag of rice on his shoulder. But the most astounding thing to me about the video was, to him it was normal. He was just I'm wading knee deep in water that's covering the island, and I'm just going to the next house with this bag of rice. And I thought, my God, this kid's 10 and he's normalized this. It's astounding. But the one thing, so you have these physical changes to the environment here, and it's noticeable. We never saw that before. We never saw this kind of inundations on Kili, for example, until about 2011. But the one thing that to me is even more noticeable, and people don't talk about this, it's the diseases, what's happening to people. We were in a 38-month straight. I was Secretary of Health, not knowing what I was getting into at the time in 2019 when I started. That wound up being a 38 straight month state of health emergency, and they never even had one for a few months here before. They've had health emergencies before, but nothing in that magnitude. We got a bad outbreak of dengue fever in August of my first year being Secretary of Health in 2019. And that rolled right into, and then a measles pandemic swept through the Pacific. It killed 82 people in Samoa. mostly kids under 5. And you couldn't come into the Marshall Islands unless, and I, again, Secretary of Health, I'm signing these orders. You couldn't come into the Marshall Islands unless you had either proof that you've had a measles vaccine or proof that you've had measles. It drove people crazy. They weren't allowed into the country. I was very strict about that. My staff and the people who were advising me, you can't come in. And the one thing I learned from the people I worked with at the hospital, doctors and nurses, you don't want measles. It gets crazy here. And we have a very good vaccination rate, especially on Madra Atoll and Ebi, the big population centers, but the outer islands, not so much. It's probably in the 70s. So we didn't want that disease in here. And this is like during dengue fever. And dengue fever is an awful disease. When you get dengue fever, you have to monitor someone's blood platelets every hour. We lost 2 little kids during that time. It's a very dangerous disease. We have thousands of cases. And it rolled right into January of 2020. And then all of a sudden on the TV, we're seeing Wuhan, China, and in Italy. I remember Italy had they were one of the first ones with the really bad outbreak. I don't know, you guys probably remember that. A lot of deciding whether or not this 80-year-old person comes to the hospital or you take the 40-year-old person who, is younger. You were deciding who was living and dying. Italy, Iran, those were some of the early countries that had the bad outbreaks. And we're sitting here, our hospitals clogged with people. The emergency room in January of 2020, every night we had people out, lines of people with dengue fever, really sick. We were using closets as rooms, these tiny little condemned rooms we weren't going to use anymore. We had to reopen them. We had so many people in the hospital. And then we're seeing Wuhan, China. And it's this awful disease, and we're like, I'm saying to these guys, we can't do 2 of these diseases at once, and blocking measles, and we had influenza that was here. All these diseases, forget the rising sea levels. This stuff was here now. We'd never seen anything like that in this part of the world. Dengue fever, measles, you had COVID. It was just crazy. And here I am, I'm not a doctor, but fortunately, thank God, I was surrounded by so many smart people. We had just this great staff of people at the Ministry of Health here. And we just decided we were going to get very aggressive, and we were going to prevent that disease from coming in. We were going to close the borders. It took us 7 hours to convince the politicians to close the borders. We were the very first country, and like I said before, everybody was calling me nuts. I walked into a breakfast the next morning, and someone said, "How does it feel to be the most hated person in the Marshall Islands?" And I was like, okay. But within 2 weeks, like I said, every Pacific island was starting, after calling me crazy in some of these Zoom calls we had as all the secretaries of health trying to deal with this issue. They were calling me nuts. Within 2 weeks, they were like all closing their borders because it's an island. You can prevent the disease from coming in if you tell the airlines you can't come here anymore. And so that's what happened. But I like to say, yes, rising sea levels and what's happening in the environment is important, but look at the health issues the world is suffering from during those 5 years. It's like, that was like, wow. And I keep thinking, what happens the next time? Is it going to be worse? It's pretty scary. So to me, it's not just the environment, it's also what it does to health. And like I said before, I just want to add this. We had one of the highest diabetes rates per capita in the world, and we have malnutrition in kids, 2 of the comorbidities for COVID. That was pretty scary when you were thinking that maybe this disease could come rolling in here. But anyway, I'm sorry about the long-winded answers, but that was very critical.
No, please, this is the topic that we are studying. So we are going to make a storytelling about all this information that we are getting. So
okay. And I love storytelling, as you're finding out. So I love talking about this stuff. It's a fascinating place, the Marshall Islands.
Yeah. Well, now going off your health issues and the climate change, have you seen any local initiatives that have taken place to adapt to these changes?
Yeah, there's we have some NGOs here. All the NGOs are involved in it. There's Joe Chicum, which is an organization that was created by Kathy Jitnell, who's a great poet and spoke in the United Nations. And I know several years back, I actually did the video for that. I filmed some of that. Her application was a video application, which I helped her with. So we have a lot of really good advocates here. They go to the COP meetings every year and try to advocate for the Marshall Islands. And when you're trying to advocate against big countries like the United States, and who don't want to go along with any of this climate change stuff, especially nowadays with the new administration that's in there, who really don't care about climate change and have decided to ignore it. It's an uphill battle. And so you do have a lot of people here and organizations that are constantly fighting this battle for us. But it's very frustrating, and to a certain extent, when I think about it myself, it's very disheartening, because it's almost in a certain way it's hopeless, because you can't suddenly get 8 billion people to change the way they're existing and living. Everybody stop driving cars, or whatever you want to try to do to stop this climate change. I look at my grandkids and I think, oh my God, the things that they're going to have to face when they get older. I just can't imagine. It's hard now. And think about what it's going to be like when they're my age, if they can get that far. It's a really worrying and troubling situation I think the world is in. And I just hope people like you guys, the younger generations of educated people, can figure this out for my grandkids.
Yes.
Gesundheit.
And are there any conflicts? Thank you. Are there any conflicts or tensions related to these initiatives, or like the lands, the climate change?
Conflicts? Between people?
Yeah, between people or associations.
The one nice thing about the Marshall Islands that I've always liked, the pandemic was a great example. We argued with each other, and I had some incredibly big fights. But in the end, when it came down to human life, I really believe for those 4 years, everybody was on the same page. That's what it's like living in the Marshall Islands. We're all one. There's no murders here. Every once in a couple of years it happens. But it's like everybody here is family. And the arguments you have, even with some of the people that probably really don't like me, I know they don't hate me, because we're all like one big family. Even though I'm in the Marshall Islands, when you marry a local woman like I did 37 years ago, you become like one person, and that's the way they look at you, and that's the way they treat you most of the time. I know when someone's really mad at me, when it's all of a sudden I'm Jack the American. It's like, I haven't been an American for 45 years, thank God. But that's what we're like here. It's a very cohesive society. And when you have arguments and disagreements with people, I don't view it as hatred. It's more like you're fighting with a brother or sister, or you're arguing with your mom or dad or whatever. It's not like in the Western societies when somebody cuts you off when you're driving, someone flips you the bird, and out in the United States, and you never see them again. Well, you can't do that here. You flip someone the bird, the next day you're going to be asking them to help you with something. Everybody here. There's only 20,000 people. So you have to be very careful about how you treat people. It's a very non-confrontative society. And it's really a wonderful way to live. But we don't have those kind of conflicts you have in other countries. There's not somebody here saying, this climate change stuff's a bunch of crap, because we've seen it firsthand. I just don't understand the United States people there who deny climate change, and their forests are burning, and they're getting hit with these bad hurricanes and all these awful things that are happening that really didn't happen a lot before. So you can deny it all you want, but it's there, and it's got to be dealt with.
Probably the call ends quite soon. If you still have a bit extra time, we have a couple of more questions.
Yeah, sure.
It's fine.
Yeah, my time is yours. Whatever you want to ask, it's fine.
Okay, we have 10 minutes on this call, so in 5 minutes we can end it, and I'll send you an email.
Okay.
So the next question is about the future views you have about the Marshall Islands. So in 20, 30 years, how do you envision the territory to look like?
Well, hopefully we're not a dive site. I worry about the inundation. I mean, the world, look, you see it all the time. You guys see it. The world is rapidly changing. The earth is rapidly changing. And I don't know who's going to be the big hero here and figure some of these things out. I mean, human beings adapt. And that's one thing I think that's in the favor of humanity is they do adapt. But the problem is, and it's very much like that here, is people don't tend to do things unless you're in a crisis. In the outside world, people tend not to become very cohesive until it's like, oh my God, this is it. We've got to do something now. And it's usually, a lot of times it's too late. That again, we're not like that here. We can be very cohesive in the Marshall Islands when it comes time to stay together on something. But the outside world, they wait till the very last minute. And this is something where you can't do that. I think you've got to change quick, or there's going to be awful things happening. I mean, that's probably the way it's going to happen. If I had to look into the future, it's going to take a lot of awful events for a lot of people to say suddenly, okay, now we really, forget the oil companies and all that stuff. We've got to do something here. Unfortunately, I think that's the way it may wind up, but I hope it doesn't.
Are there lots of people who's moving from the atolls, from the islands to the other countries?
Yeah.
Because
Well, here's something interesting about that, and I don't know what this sounds like, but a lot of journalists will come here and they'll say, "Oh, we want to talk. We understand a lot of people are moving to the U.S." Probably half the population of the Marshall Islands lives in the U.S. now. I know well over half of the Bikinians live there, and I think people are seeking better education. It's not because of climate change. I think eventually it will become that. A lot of journalists will say, "Oh, these people are all leaving because of climate change." Well, it's not. I'm here to tell you that I don't believe that. Not yet. It may come to that, and there may be a few who did that, but not many. Most of it has to do with, think about it. If you're a parent, better education, better health care, a higher standard of living. That's what they're seeking. Any parent, any human being is always looking for a better way of life. And when they see the United States, that westernized culture, which has been inundated, all the schools here, it's like a Western education system. Everything here, everything's been westernized since the World War II when the U.S. came in and defeated the Japanese. So you've had this heavy, we use the American dollar. So everything's Western, westernized. And then you go to the United States and it's like, oh, this is what they've been trying to create out here, because you can't do it here. I mean, there's a lot of Western things that have failed here and they just don't work because of the way people are here, thank God. So you have this westernization of our culture here that's, like I said, internet, TikTok, everything, YouTube, it's all here. And all the young people are really into it. So I think that a lot of these people have migrated to the U.S., but at this point, it's not because of climate change. It's because they want better education, better health care, more opportunities. And it's a tough grind for Marshallese because a lot of them are working minimum wage jobs back there. Minimum wage here is like $4.50. It's very tough. Gas is $7 a gallon. Food is you get a cucumber like this and it's $4. It's a very expensive place to live if you want to eat and drive a car around and whatever. So they go to the U.S. and some things are cheaper and you get free public education. I mean, public education here is free, but it's getting better, but it's not that great. We have good private schools here. But anyway, there's a lot of issues with what people are seeking in the U.S., but I don't think it's climate change at this point.
Well, now more or less that we have talked about the climate change and why people are migrating and all of that. What would you think that priorities and like the more like what's the most urgent thing that you would say would need to improve in the territory? Well, in general, let's just go with it.
Yeah. Well, they are, I didn't mention this before, but they are doing a lot of physical things to the atoll here in Madro. There's lots of seawalls that have been built, and they're continuing to build seawalls. Same thing on Ebi. Ebi's on Kwajalein Atoll, where the U.S. military base is out here, and they're also building pretty big seawalls along that area too. So seawalls are being built. A lot of physical activity can be seen here. But I also, again, I'm a little biased because I was Secretary of Health for so long. I really think healthcare facilities should be an absolute number one priority here. And not just the facilities. You have to get, it's one thing to have a nice facility, but you also have to have, really good doctors and nurses here. And during my time, we had them. A lot of doctors and nurses have left after the pandemic was cleared. But you really need the personnel and the leadership to be prepared to get through some of these harder times if they should come again. So to me, healthcare should be a priority along with the building of the physical barriers to climate change, like the seawalls.
Okay. And would you say that the locals are like really involved in the decision making of the land and urban planning? Like, are their voices heard, or would you say that their voices need to be pushed a bit more into the light?
Well, I mean, the one thing I have noticed, as we all have, those of us who've been here for a long time, there are many consultants that come out here. I'm a consultant too. I do some consulting too, but I've lived here for 45 years. So what you have happening now, the phenomenon we're seeing more and more is lots of outside consultants, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, all these various organizations, WHO, the United Nations, UNICEF, and they're generally good people, but a lot of times you see situations where, and I'm not going to name any organization that's doing this, but I see it happening here, and I don't want to, get anybody in trouble. But like, what's good for Italy is good for the Marshall Islands. You get a program that they use somewhere in the Western world, and they try to say, okay, we're going to use that in the Marshall Islands. And so many times you see inappropriate technology a lot of times, and inappropriate advice, whether it's on financial issues or climate issues. Sometimes the advice we get from consultants are from people who haven't lived here long enough to understand the way this place works. That's the easy way to put it. So we have a lot of ideas that roll through here, and we're just going, oh my God, I hope they don't do this. You hear some consultants talking about certain kinds of ideas that, again, may work in Italy, but they're sure as hell not going to work here. So you have a lot of those kind of issues. But I think in the end, it's good to have expert advice. It's good to have a nice, educated, experienced brain to pick from time to time when big issues come up here. I know I did it my entire time when I was Secretary of Health. I was constantly picking people's brains to the point where, maybe they didn't want to talk to me anymore. I'm like that. I like talking to people, and I like understanding what their viewpoints are. It helps you make better decisions when you listen to people. So that was always my MO. But a lot of times the consultants are like, they're so used to doing things in westernized countries that's the way they think things should be done here. And it's unfortunate because they're really missing out on their own education if they don't listen to people here.
Okay. And would you say that, leading off of that there are any traditions or practices that, and even local knowledge that you think that these institutions should be recognizing and kind of implementing?
I've always believed, and now that I'm an old person now myself, that the one thing that I think is neglected here, to our own detriment, is not listening to your elders. I mean, that's something the younger generation, I hate to say it this way because it's not everybody, but a lot of the younger generation, they look at their elders and like, they don't know how to, do email, and they can't, they don't do TikTok, and they're not modernized, but the knowledge, the basic humanistic knowledge of the environment and the way people are is unmatched. And I just think they're wasting. Maybe that's a situation with most of humanity. They, the old people, those old people, they have their old ways, and it's not worth listening to. But I think it is, and I've always, my main advisors when I was at the Ministry of Health, one guy he had been there for 50 years. His name was Arata, and I used to go to him all the time, and I'd say, well, what are your ideas here? And he had 50 years. Imagine 50 years of working for the Ministry of Health, more than 50. The basic humanistic knowledge that he was able to impart to me and teach me was incredible. I mean, it was like, again, you don't get degrees for this. I don't have a PhD in anything, but I certainly do have knowledge that comes from learning from people. And I think that's a really important part of Marshallese culture that I think is vanishing, and it's really sad. I understand young people, they have to prepare themselves for the new world, and it is TikTok and internet. That's the new world now. So they do have to prepare themselves for that. But it's too bad that they overlook what they consider old ways. To me, are sometimes the most knowledgeable and most important kinds of knowledge that you can get is from your older people who've been through, all kinds of things. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and would you say, well, speaking about the new world, and more specifically, like for the Marshallese and like the physical new world that they're going to start to have to adapt to and live in, would you say that in the case that there is a need for the mass migration or a change of residence, is there's like a common concern? Is there like a plan that is not in the, how did you call it? That is not in the national adaptation plan, that is kind of more of a local plan, like, we'll all go to Hawaii, or I don't know.
Yeah. I did a feature film in Marshallese. It's called Gilel, The Calling of the Shell. All the stuff's on YouTube. If you want the link to my films, I can give it to you. It's about a little girl, 10 years old, facing the idea that the gravesite, she's seeing this gravesite wash out into the ocean. And it's really a lot of questions that need to be asked by some of these young people in terms of, what their futures want to be. The passion for these islands, and I started to explain this before, but I didn't really finish it, is every Marshallese person, it's a matrilineal society, women are very powerful, everything passes through the women, the land. There's an expression in Marshallese that basically says, we know who our mother is, but our father could be anybody. And the reason why that's important, that's why the land passes through the women. Every kid here is attached to a piece of land. I take my kids to Bikini. I took my grandson there when he was 6 years old, and I could say to him, you see this big giant piece of land? It's yours forever. It belongs to you. And it's really an astounding feeling when you tell a kid that. So everybody here is attached to this land. And when at the end of this film, I asked the question, what happens to a nation when it's underwater? Where do they go? What do they become? What becomes of their culture? I mean, I know a lot of Marshallese are really working hard in the United States to maintain their culture and their traditions, but it's very hard when you're working an 8-to-5 job and you're worried about paying bills and everything else. You can keep some of those things. You can do your traditional. We have a 1-year birthday party. That's when they say a baby has survived their first year they're going to live. That's a big celebration, and they still do a lot of these things in the U.S. They maintain those parts of their culture, but there's still a big part about, and they're losing their language. I mean, the film I was just telling you about, I showed it in Arkansas once. It was packed. A lot of people come to watch these films when I show them in various places. And the one thing I noticed was these kids were reading the subtitles. You know, it's all in Marshallese. They're Marshallese films, but subtitled in English. And I noticed all these kids are reading the subtitles because they can't speak Marshallese. I mean, and it's a strange kind of situation. You see these kids, they're Marshallese kids, but they can't speak their language. And that, when you lose the language and you're not living on your traditional piece of land, I think a big chunk of your being is missing. And even my grandkids, you know, that they're all communicating English really well, and Marshallese comes afterwards. So it's almost like Marshallese is their second language. Now, when my wife and I raised our kids, whenever I was around, everybody spoke English. Whenever I was gone, everybody spoke Marshallese. So my kids are very bilingual, and I would almost say English is their second language. But my grandkids, it's the other way around. They're learning English first. And that kind of bothers me. But, you know, my wife always speaks Marshallese to them and stuff. But it's not like when we were raising our kids. So the language to me is important. That's going by the boards. With all these kids have moved to the U.S., Marshallese is important to communicate sometimes to your parents and grandparents, but the rest of your day you're communicating English. And suddenly Marshallese becomes less important. It's happened in Hawaii, in Guam, where the Chamorro people are. Only like, I think 5% or 10% of the population speaks their native language. Here it's much greater. It's in the 80s or 90s or whatever. There's not very few kids here that don't grow up learning their own language. But when they go to the U.S., that disappears, and parts of their culture disappears. They can love their land. You know, that film Gilo that I was talking about. To me, I did an interview with NPR, and I was talking about this is like a love film, a love poem or a film for the Marshall Islands, and how much, you know, this place is important and how much we love it. And I noticed when I showed it at the University of Washington at one point. And there were people crying when they were just seeing scenes of the ocean. All the transitions in the film were nature. And I said to this woman I had seen crying when she was watching the film, I said, that wasn't a very emotional part of the film. Why were you crying? She goes, I haven't been there in 20 years. I haven't seen the way you presented the nature in this film. I haven't seen that in 20 years. And it really, it just hit me really hard. So I think about that when you talk about what happens when people transition to another place, and imagine everybody gone, not living here. It's like, that's the end of the Marshall Islands culture to me. I mean, they can try to maintain it, but you see, and there'll be small things that are kept around, like the Caymans and things, but the culture here is land and tradition and land. Land. That's what it's all about, Marshallese culture and their language. Those are the two things that would disappear if they all had to leave, I think.
Okay. And, but do you know of any place that these Marshallese people, because at some point, it's gonna have to be done, the migrations.
Well, I mean, Springdale, Arkansas. I mean, there's some places where 10% or some, maybe even more now, but it used to be like 10% of the Springdale, Arkansas school population is Marshallese. They've all congregated there. You can get off, why Springdale? Well, you can get off the plane. They've got Tyson's Chickens there, all the chicken processing plants. They've got 3M. Walmart's got big warehouses there. They've got furniture. They've got a lot of factories there. You can get off the plane, walk right into a job, even if you can't speak English, because people are there. There's so many Marshallese there. They can help connect you and get you a job. Salem, Oregon, where my wife went to school. I mean, she's got 150 relatives in that place. You've got Spokane, Washington. You've got the Seattle area, Portland. They like the Pacific Northwest. Pacific Northwest is a really good place, I think, for Marshallese to live because they're very respectful of Pacific cultures. And to me, Hawaii is the worst place. I think Hawaii is the most racist place I've ever been to, because they don't like Micronesians. And not everybody, but my daughter went to school there for 4 years, and the things she experienced as a Micronesian were awful. The people there do not treat Micronesians in a civil way. I'll say that a lot of people there, not everybody, of course, but I wouldn't want, when you mentioned they'll all move to Hawaii, that to me would be the worst place to go. Hopefully they move on to better places, and I think the Pacific Northwest, Springdale, Arkansas, these are places where I think that they're much better off. I love the Washington State. The University of Washington, when they showed my film, they had people, all these different islanders from all over the place. They weren't Marshallese. They were standing up doing poems and doing some really good, talking about climate change. It was really an amazing thing. Professor Holly Barker was there, helped arrange all that. It was really an amazing experience. So the Pacific Northwest and the way they respect Pacific Islanders, I think, would be the place to go. And Arkansas also. The local population there has a lot of respect for the Marshallese. They've done some NPR specials there about the Marshallese and how much they've contributed to their economy and everything else. They've geared their schools and their hospitals and facilities there to try to help the Marshallese. So it's a really a good place for them. But I wouldn't recommend. Hawaii is so expensive, and it can be so nasty there for people. I wouldn't recommend anybody go there.
Okay. Well, that was our final question.
Okay.
And is there anything else that you would like to add that you consider important that we didn't mention?
Well, what you're doing is important. And the one thing, I've worked with the Bikinians for a long time, and my marching orders from the day I walked into their lives was get our story out there, tell our story to the world. Make sure all of our elders are telling their stories to these various news organizations, because it's so important. And so I would say what you're doing as young people doing this story, that's been my job for 45 years, is getting the story out and telling this story and making sure people understand what happened to these people, what's happening to these people. And even though we're a nation of now, our population just dwindles all the time. When I first came out here, there was about 55,000 people. Probably now there's probably about 35,000 people. I mean, it's just dwindled. People are just, every airplane, they take off, and one-way tickets. So it's sad, but I'm going to be the last person here. I'll turn the lights out when everybody else is gone. I really love this place, and I know a lot of people here who are still here. I think a lot of people who have moved to the U.S. would really like to be able to live here, but economically, they can't. And sometimes medically, they have issues that we can't deal with here at the hospital. So, they have to leave. So it's kind of sad in that regard. But, it's a very important that you guys tell this story. And I really appreciate, you guys interviewing me today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't want to take your time more, but I have a quick question.
Okay.
I saw that on an interview you mentioned that this Rinet's nuclear waste site is a very bad solution to this radioactive problem. It's a bit absurd, but to ask, in your opinion, what could have been done more after this disaster in this radioactive?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because the United States, I grew up in the U.S., and, I love my relatives, and there's great things about the American culture that I like. But during this period of time, and you know, I'll thank them immensely for everything they did for me and the people here during the pandemic. The U.S. was extraordinary. They got us the vaccines and the testing and everything I asked for. They always came through. But when it comes to the nuclear testing, the arrogance and ignorance that they displayed here and the callous disregard for these people was disgusting and extraordinary. I just can't believe it. Why, when they left and they finished the testing in 1958 and they had all this radioactive crap everywhere, why didn't they just clean it up before they left? Why didn't they had the technology to build a hydrogen bomb that was 1,000 times greater than the bomb in Hiroshima. They certainly had the technology to clean this place up. And to this day, 2025 in December, they still haven't done it, and we're still suffering from that. And they still think the best way to deal with this situation is to keep throwing money. And money is important. Every Marshallese person will tell you that. But they still haven't fixed the situation, and they refuse to do it. They don't think it's important enough. And we still have this dome up on Eniwetok that has radioactive material in it at sea level for the next 40,000 years.
So with enough investment, is the problem can be fixed, like a cleanup?
They could do this tomorrow. They could start on this tomorrow and clean it up and be done with it. You know, there's the scientific knowledge is there. The studies have been done. They could do it, but you know, Henry Kissinger said, "Oh, the Marshall Islands. There's there's only 90,000 people out there. Who cares?" In the Micronesia region, there's only 90,000 people. That was a Henry Kissinger quote. And really, to this day, I think that's the way a lot of the U.S. government thinks. Not American people, but it's the way the U.S. government, it's their attitude towards this region. It's always an afterthought. Very sad.
Thank you for the answer also.
Yeah. No problem.
Well, I don't know if Doa or Burak have any other questions.
We covered a lot, but go ahead.
Are available on YouTube?
Yeah, I'll email you guys the links. I have a YouTube site. I've done a lot of films, six feature films, and a lot of other stuff. So I'll send you the link for that if you're interested. The Sound of Crickets at Night. The Sound of Crickets at Night is about the nuclear issue, and Gilel is about climate change. But the other ones are just, and probably more popular with the Marshallese, are just about living here in the culture. And they're all fictional, but you'll see. I mean, it starts out that I didn't know anything about filmmaking, so that's my excuse for the early films that you may find a little bit boring, but. It was the idea of getting kids up on the screen and making sure Marshallese kids know that their lives are worth exploration in the world of film too. Just, it's not everything's Hollywood. So that was the goal there. So sometimes I left the kids up on screen for a little bit longer than I should have. So I want them to see themselves up on that big screen. Anyway.
Yeah, that would be very good. I'll send you a message and remind you.
Okay, good.
Is it like, yeah.
Well, for your time.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning.
And again, I appreciate what you guys are doing too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you guys too.
Ciao.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.